Walker Dybel, it is awesome to see you, man. I appreciate you carving out some time to talk.
Brad, thanks so much for having me. When you came out with this podcast, I was very excited because I thought to myself, Brad Weimert is going to absolutely crush it. There's a few podcasts that sort of execute on the concept of like, oh my God, I can't believe this is free. And Beyond a Million is in the small category of those podcasts that is just like a repeat winner in that category for me. So thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
I appreciate that, man. Well, it's been fun so far, and we definitely have had some cool people on to learn from. And at the core, it's just super selfish because it gives me an opportunity to learn from people that are doing things better than me in areas that I really need to learn about. And with you, that's acquisitions. So we were talking a minute ago, and you literally said, "I'm going to hold my thoughts," which was wise because we don't want to unload things before we start recording. But I was saying that I know many friends that create pretty established businesses into the high 7, 8, and even 9 figures periodically, and never look at acquisitions as a part of their strategy. And so I think it's a very important thing for people to look at, and it's timely as we potentially go into a downturn when there is even more opportunity in acquisitions than there previously was. But if you could give us a little background on yourself and how you got moving in the acquisition space, I think that's always relevant.
Yeah, let's circle back. Let's circle back to that question. I obviously have thoughts on it. So my story is one where, Brad, the reality is I'm probably just a terrible entrepreneur, right? Like in other words, I kept starting businesses, they kept failing. And the thing is that, we as entrepreneurs all kind of know that, 1 out of 10 startups might make it. And I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs and I'm like, do you believe in that stat? And they're like, no, it's high. Right. And so you get this thing where I realized that, entrepreneurship is often just punishment for people that don't understand statistics. Right. We're all just like Han Solos flying into the minefield being like, don't tell me the odds. But the thing is that, I kind of started realizing, like I'm in St. Louis, right? And so when I got my MBA here, I was, my startup was coming to a crashing halt, and I was walking down Wydown Boulevard in St. Louis. It's the only boulevard here. It's some of the biggest homes in the space, and I was looking at the houses, and I realized, I'm not in Silicon Valley. Like all the really wealthy people here, they're doing things that are like below the radar. Everything's really boring. Everything's really unsexy, right? It's just sort of like, I met a guy who manufactures like the inside piece of what are those called? Like cone lights that like are in the, there's like 2 companies in this space kind of a thing, right? Just crazy stuff like that you just would never think of or use in a sentence with words like innovation, right? And I started realizing,
Yes.
all these people, all these entrepreneurs around me in my 20s, right, that are starting companies, like no one's really doing 0 to 1 type things. Like very rarely is it 0 to 1 type things. It's always like, hey, I'm starting an SEO agency. Well, there's like 12 of them already here in St. Louis, right? So I started thinking to myself, like, look, I know there's a way to sort of buy existing companies, right? And this was like in 2004. And I just kind of didn't know how to do it. And I really didn't have any money. And I went out and was sort of met with this opaque and fragmented industry. And I had to kind of navigate it in order to ultimately buy my first company, which I then ran as 7 years, tried to grow through acquisition, but ended up selling to an acquisition target. And then I didn't learn my lesson. Did another startup. 18 months later, we were completely out of cash. And then I used the money from the exit, and I actually bought 6 more companies, and ran those. Right. So my story is.
Hold on. So you ran out of cash 18 months in, and you then sold the company because you didn't have the capacity to operate, or what happened there?
Sorry, the exit that I had in 2013, the company I ran for 7 years, I had an exit, did a quick little startup that didn't work out again. And then I was like, what am I doing? Every time I buy a company, it works. And every time I try to start from scratch. And I went through one of the top 10 accelerator programs. We recruited an executive to be our CEO. We were oversubscribed in the capital raise. Like it was all the things, right, that you hope for. Users loved it. But it was one of these where if I try to launch a sexy, SaaS company with big margins, with an executive from Microsoft running it in an oversubscribed capital raise, the odds of that working out are not great. But if I buy a printing company, if I buy an aluminum manufacturing company, if I buy an e-commerce company, right, where there's already an existing infrastructure, I'm then able to acquire that asset, that infrastructure, those systems, that revenue, the earnings in a day, right? And I started realizing, why aren't more people talking about this, right? And we talk about entrepreneurship, and it's sort of like, well, we like to think of that as starting from scratch because these are our heroes, right? We think about Steve Jobs, we think about Elon Musk, we think about all these people, right? And the truth is that Elon Musk bought PayPal. He acquired it. He's going to buy Twitter, I guess, right? He acquired Tesla and was sued for calling himself a co-founder, right? And I'm just saying acquisition as a lever has been here the whole time. It's just there's not a lot of emphasis on it, but it's the fastest way to acquire an infrastructure and revenue and earnings that you want.
Well, let me ask you something just for clarity. So you mentioned and I think I've got the concept, but for the sake of clarifying, you mentioned the 0 to 1. And so you said not a lot of people are creating the 0 to 1 companies. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, thanks. So whenever I'm talking with an entrepreneur and they're telling me about what they're working on, this would be like a new startup entrepreneur, right? They might say like, well, here's my idea, here's what I'm working on. And I really try to drill into what is the infrastructure that you're trying to build, okay? And the concept here is usually we figure out that what they're trying to build is something that already exists, okay? Now, I'm not saying that all businesses should be acquired rather than starting from scratch. I'm just saying that most of the time, it's something that already exists. So 0 to 1 was the concept from Peter Thiel, the PayPal founder, who wrote that book. And the concept there is creating things that just don't exist today, right? So sort of like, before there was Facebook, there was no Facebook, right? So it's sort of creating entire businesses and concepts around things that don't currently exist.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought. That makes sense. Why is it that one of the things you mentioned was this idea of you kind of have two concepts running parallel here. One is the notion of the software company and the 0 to 1 idea and something unique and different. And you had this software company that it sounds like was pretty well funded. You brought in a seasoned executive, albeit from Microsoft and not a better company, but a seasoned executive, and then had a hard time making it work. But you have comfort in the idea of the boring, stable brick and mortar companies. Why is that part of it relevant to you? That the software versus sort of the other one being, it sounds like you perceive that to be more stable, more predictable.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I wouldn't go so far as to say bricks and mortar. I would say that when I started acquiring businesses, it was the only way to really get leverage, right? In sub $25 million acquisitions. Okay. They weren't giving out cash flow loans on, buying a book printing company. You know what I mean? Instead, I was wanting to buy e-commerce businesses like pre-2010. And I was having a really hard time getting financing. And so someone who didn't have any money at that time, it was just not a path that I could go unless you went like super small, which was, not interesting. So the thing is I started doing bricks and mortar mostly because it had internal collateral that I could then leverage with the bank in order to buy it. So it's basically a leverage buyout, right? Recipe. Now, by the time I hit 2016, that's when I bought my first e-com business, right? And so it's not entirely bricks and mortar. However, I will say, Brad, that when I bought that company, I have the largest website that sells macerating toilets.
I don't know those words together.
Yeah. So the concept is instead of a toilet that flushes gravitationally, okay, it discharges into the back into a macerator, which is a garbage disposal, and then shoots up into your existing stack. The concept is
there's so many things that are gross to me about that.
I know. You can put a bathroom anywhere at 1/10 of the cost in 4 hours DIY, right? I mean, it's very simple. But the concept here's the big thing. It's a brilliant little invention, but the concept is that there's no like technological innovation that's rapidly coming toward us that's going to eliminate the need for toilets,
Hmm.
right? So even though it's a lightweight business model, right, and it's not bricks and mortar whatsoever, it's really like sort of a 4-hour work week style business that I own. And the concept there is that I wanted to buy something that, when you're using debt and you're using leverage, you really want to be finding something that is going to be a little bit more stable. Right now, here's the thing. Hold on, because you might be getting at this and not realizing you're asking it. The question is, where do I find that margin of safety when I'm buying these companies? And is it the type of business that I'm looking for? And the answer is no. So I've got a whole AE matrix. It's like you can buy a high growth company, you can buy, a eternally profitable business, you can buy a turnaround, or you can buy a platform business, right? And so you need to understand like the different opportunity profiles that exist in acquisition. And the thing, Brad, is that I don't believe that the risk in acquisition actually is in the company that you're buying. Instead, I feel like it's in the entrepreneur.
Mm. All the time?
Bad decisions could be made, I guess. So I mean, I think that, but the thing is I guess what I'm trying to get at there, all the time. I mean, I guess there's a really small percentage where that would not be true. But I think that ultimately, so many people that look at acquisitions are so distracted with trying to de-risk the acquisition, right? They're looking for a business that's sort of like, pick your favorite number, kicking off $1 million in earnings a year, right? Or whatever it is. And for guys like us that know what it's like to run a business, we know that there's no such business that runs itself, right? And the concept is that like once you buy that company, you are the CEO of this company, okay? And whatever happened prior is now on your plate, right? And there's going to be business fluctuations, there's going to be business challenges, and it's up to us to run, operate, and lead that company to where it needs to go.
Yeah, so that actually opens an interesting point here, which is you're talking about sort of buying and leveraging businesses that are out there on a one-off basis, but it sounds like, at least the way that it's been framed so far, these are acquisitions for the sake of, well, that's actually the point is, what is the purpose of the acquisition? And what the purpose is matters relative to how it gets run, what you're doing, what you're looking for, what you might be willing to buy, right? So if you're looking at a standalone business and you're saying, hey, I want a shitty business, pun intended, that kicks off some cash flow. That's your toilet business.
I got it.
It has nothing to do with my payments company, for example, with Easy Pay Direct. So maybe it exists independently, and I would be able to create money, and it would make sense for me. But it's not a bolt-on in any way, right? I can't roll it into my existing infrastructure or use my existing team to leverage it. Do you spend most of your time looking at how do you approach acquisition? What is it for you? Do you spend most of your time looking at things that as independent businesses work or don't work? Or are you involved in your day-to-day with looking to help companies grow through acquisition?
Yes, thank you. So it's a really good observation. I think let me share first that how I've chosen to approach it and the opportunity that exists for entrepreneurs to capitalize are slightly different, right? In other words, you're familiar, I know, with the Fulfilled by Amazon aggregator companies that have raised, I think it was 12 or 14 billion dollars last year, and has just gone on a buying spree trying to roll up these, e-com businesses. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, a previous guest of the podcast, Tom Shipley, launched an Amazon aggregator, raised $100 million and set up the team and put it on go.
Awesome.
But very small window when money was available, and excited about that model, which is, I think, closed at this point. But continue.
Yeah. Well, the point is that I met 3 different CEOs, founder CEOs of aggregator companies that told me that they read Buy Then Build, which then gave them the idea to roll up businesses in this space, right? So I think that the thing is that when I first started, like my journey has been one where, um, I was looking at doing something like that very similar, and I think that I was just a little too early is ultimately what happened there. But the thing is that, I met an entrepreneur um, about a month ago who read Buy Then Build. He took his startup company that was profitable and turned around and started acquiring companies. And within 18 months after reading Buy Then Build and implementing the strategy, he acquired $30 million in transactional value of other businesses that generated more value to their company, not just because of cross sell opportunities, but because they were acquiring intellectual property that was critical to their startup. He now is under contract with two more companies exceeding 100 million in transactional value, right? And what he said to me was, your strategy completely changed how we were approaching what we were doing, and we were realizing that the things that we needed to accelerate our growth were actually there. They just needed to be acquired. And he said, so I'm now, I've now increased the value of my business by if these two transactions close, over 125 million dollars in like 24 months, kind of a thing. So the concept is it's there. My particular journey went a little bit different because what I wanted to do was sort of like uh, build the smallest private equity firm that no one's ever heard of. And my plan was to buy in multiple different verticals. And Brad, what I'm going to tell you is that I believe in taking a lot of at bats, and I believe that I'm not scared to fail, and I do it a lot. Okay, and I think that there was some faulty logic in buying multiple companies in multiple geographical territories, multiple industries, multiple different business strategies, different customer profiles, different management teams, all at once. And that's ultimately what I did, and my head exploded. But I got really good. I got really good at sort of like learning and navigating the private capital markets in lots of different industries. And so I think that, where I've ended up going is I've been limiting the amount of companies that I own. Okay. And I sort of have my life sort of exists in three areas. Like, one is helping sellers exit, online business entrepreneurs exit through Quiet Light. Okay. As I work as a broker. Second is the businesses that I've acquired that I run, which is now down to two. And then third is going to be everything Buy Then Build and Acquisition Lab related. And what we do at the Acquisition Lab is we help people, usually first-time buyers, acquire a business, right? And it works more like a mastermind, not a buy-side advisor. So the concept there is that we're able to help entrepreneurs save six figures, no problem, easy, but get the education and support around how to actually run an acquisition process. And so that can be anything from, hey, I just sold my company and I don't want to do that startup part again because it's so hard, to, hey, I want to, leave my middle management job and own my own company, to, I own a company doing 10 to 20 million and, I want to grow through acquisition. And so I need to learn how to do this strategy. And that's everything from healthcare to online to, manufacturing and anything. Like there's no industry that we focus on at the lab.
Dope. Okay, cool. So I want to talk about that specifically and kind of walk down this path for the latter scenario. But for the sake of some clarity, Buy Then Build is a book that you wrote specifically about buying companies and then building them from there, as opposed to building them from the ground up. So let's use that as a starting point, because certainly you can look at just buying and then building a company, but the people listening to this are probably entrepreneurs that have built a noteworthy company and are looking to potentially buy things, whether they've thought about it or not at this point. The relevant part of, I think the big thing that a lot of people would be served to know more about is the process of buying a company that will help you grow, right? That will plug a hole in your particular company. So let's start with where you find companies for acquisition. Just like broad stroke, how do people approach finding, and maybe even before that, how do you think about what companies might be helpful for you to buy?
Yeah, thanks. So I think that that's a really great point, Brett. I think that most people are like, "Oh, this sounds great. Let me just go, buy something. Let's like try to get deal flow cranking." Right? It's such a big
Right.
mistake, and like the number one uh, mistake that I see buyers make is exactly that, and they don't stop and think like, "Okay, what am I bringing to the table?" Okay, entrepreneurs that are here listening to this podcast already know what they bring to the table, right? I mean, come on, like they're already running a business. They know where their strengths are. They know if they're a revenue generator or profit maximizer or whatever. And the thing is that they're looking for trying to achieve that next level. The first thing that I think that they need to do is figure out what is my business strategy, right? Like where am I going to be in 5 years, and what are the things that I don't have today that I will need to be where I need to go, right? What's missing between there? And diving into that will really help identify what it is you're actually trying to buy, right? Which is a critical step. And so, in other words, you might say like, um, "Hey, I work with, I run Easy Pay Direct, and so what I want to do is just run out and acquire, every single company that's like this doing payment processing." Maybe that's one strategy you could take on, right? You could just go world domination, every flavor, right? That's sort of like a horizontal. Right? I mean,
Yep.
it's. I'm not going to tell you that that's a bad or a good strategy. It just depends on what you want to do, right? And so you'd get into a lot more commoditized. You'd be buying commoditized payment processing businesses, but would end with world domination. That's good. Or you could go vertical and say, okay, like, whatever. What are my biggest expenses? What are, I know a little bit about what you're looking to do next, and I don't know if that's public, so I won't go there. But you could go vertical and say like, hey, we're going to. Well, if we went completely vertical, you could say, I don't know, Brad, I'm going to start buying all the mastermind companies out there that are running like online courses or something like that. And so now you've got this customer facing piece that you're selling all these online courses, and you're taking all the payment processing in the background. Completely different strategies, right? So you need to just say, where am I trying to go first, right?
Mm.
After that,
And let me add some clarity
yeah,
to that. So like those two examples were one was buying a revenue stream and kind of playing the cash flow game, meaning, hey, 3 years from now I can pay off the debt from buying the company, and at that point I'll have a tremendous amount more cash flow for my payment company. Or I'm buying X in cash flow a month, and the debt service on it is going to be a lot less than that. So I'm buying immediate cash flow, but then I've got this ongoing debt service. And that's just amplifying the size of the business. That's one type of acquisition. The other was functionally this idea of me buying. So probably, for clarity, call it 15% of the Easy Pay Direct portfolio, which is like a huge chunk, is serving people that sell information. And those are like, Tony Robbins, Dean Graziosi, Grant Cardone, Frank Kern, digital marketer, like all these people selling information products. So when you talk about buying a mastermind, functionally for us, that acquisition strategy would be sort of buying the lead source where our target market exists, where they come from for that segment. And so lead acquisition would be another. But the same thing would be true of like buying a marketing agency or something, right? Like, hey, we have to do marketing and I want to accelerate our marketing. So let me buy a marketing agency to fill that gap, just like I would fill the lead source gap. Is that where we're going here?
yeah, that exactly right. It's what is, or some. It might be like, hey, I want to not an Easy Pay Direct, but it could simply be I want to do the same thing I'm doing, but through geographic expansion, right? Like
Mm.
maybe you're in a fragmented bricks and mortar business that's sort of regional, but like you have no representation in other regions, right? Or maybe you own a 3PL, right? A third party logistics center. And you know that, if you're based in Kansas City, you can't hit 99% of the population in the United States with 3-day shipping at cost. So you need to buy 5 more, 3PLs as an example, right? So figuring out kind of
Mhm.
what that is, and ultimately sometimes people will look at this and say, I need to make sure I'm acquiring a management team with it,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Right. And so size also becomes a part of the recipe. And so, in other words, just to say, like, hey, I'm going to go buy a payment processor as long as they're over 1 million, I'm good. Maybe.
I want to get to the integration part because that's like I think that's the scary part for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
But I don't want to jump the gap between we're talking about the why you would buy, and then before you can even think about can I integrate them or do they have an internal staff or does it work with my existing business? where the fuck do you find them? What's the approach to finding the businesses?
Yeah.
Certainly there are these brokerages out there, right? Is that the right approach? Because you also I get feedback from people who acquire a lot. And they're like, oh, I don't want to touch a brokerage because we're going to have an inflated price. You're going to have somebody else's hands in it, et cetera. And then I have other people that are like, oh, but those are a little bit more vetted. So where do you find the deals, and what's your take on the different approaches there?
Yeah, okay. So it depends. If you're an existing entrepreneur and you've got a company that's viable and up and going, okay, you're actually in the catbird seat in terms of when it comes to acquisition. Okay, it's going to be easier for you to execute. It's going to be easier for you to be taken seriously by all the different parties involved, meaning the lender, potentially the private equity firm, the seller, like all of the things, right? And so I think that just understand that your audience on this podcast is way further along than any Joe Schmo, entrepreneur or wannabe, right? And so they've already got a lot of that infrastructure and that history behind them. For them to find these acquisitions, sure, look at brokers. Okay, my feeling on brokers is that when I'm looking for businesses, they are the fastest source of deal flow, period. Okay, period. Why? Because when you want to sell your business, where do you go? Do you just go to whoever called you on the phone who says that they want to buy it? Right? I've been doing this for 18 years. And what I would tell you is trying to do proprietary deal flow like that. Okay, even when it comes to selling or buying, is that the odds that that deal is actually going to close is actually very small. Okay, now here's the other thing, Brad. When you are going to go sell Easy Pay Direct, okay, I don't know what your situation is, but if you're like most entrepreneurs, Easy Pay Direct is the most valuable thing that you own, right? And so when you go to sell it, how would you feel about, I'll give you no money down and I'm going to pay you $1 a day for 1 billion days. Does that work for you?
I'm going to spit on you.
Exactly. So the terms are terrible. Okay. And like, there's a lot of so the thing is that when entrepreneurs want to exit the most valuable thing that they have, right? It's all about timing and getting them mentally ready to actually sell. Okay. Every single seller that has signed up with a broker is ready to close. Okay. And if you're in the say, $10 million marketplace, sub $25 million marketplace, more often than not, there's a purchase price right on the thing. I have a lot of buyers that are like, Walker, what should I offer for this? And I'm like, is there an asking price on the listing? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, what's it say? And they're like, 6 million. How do you feel about 6 million? I mean, we're literally talking about 3, 4, 5 times, earnings on the business. You're talking about 3, 4, 5 year payback. You're going to get a 90% loan potentially, and you're going to get 100% cash on cash return. If you already own a business and you don't need the cash flow coming from that business, you can build up that equity in 3 years. You can pay off the whole thing. It's insane in terms of the equity buildup that comes from these things, right? So the best place to find them, sure, go sign up for all the brokers that are in the space. Okay, reach out to the brokers that are in the space because they will be the fastest source of deal flow. Are you going to pay an inflated price? Okay. Are you paying a half a turn or a full turn? Maybe. But you're getting a deal done and you're getting it done quickly, and the equity buildup is insane anyway. The risk profile is low if you're already doing it. That'd be my argument. Okay. I think if you know what you want to buy, the best place to actually go is conferences in that industry. I really do. And the thing is, you just want to go there and you want to hang out at the bar, let everyone know, what it is you're trying to do. And it will take time to build. Okay. But I've seen this a couple of times in the last decade where people do this. And then the next thing you know, they're the aggregator in the space. Right. So there's going to be going to conferences, I think, is the best. But when people are like, oh man, business is so hard, take them out for a beer, put your arm around them. How bad is it? Here, talk to me, right? You're looking for pain. You're looking for pain because those people are going to be ready, right? If you're talking to someone who's strong and they're really not going to have interest to sell, and when they do, they're going to run the right channel, right? Which is the broker. So you want the broker to call you when that happens.
Got it. So two different approaches here. One is basically you functionally pay for a full pipeline by going to a broker. So if you look at this from a sort of as any business owner would from a client acquisition perspective. You have to create a
Yeah.
funnel to get your clients in, right? And you've got the big audience, and then how do you convert them into an actual customer or client? And the same thing would be true of acquisitions, where you're looking for the pool of people that are maybe willing to buy or willing to sell, rather. A broker is going to narrow that down to we're willing to sell right now.
Right now.
The alternative with like going to a conference is all those people at the conference are in the vertical that you're interested in acquiring in. They may or may not be willing to sell, and you're feeling that out.
Yeah, these things are all about timing, right? Like you will not die with Easy Pay Direct. Well, I hope. I guess you could. But the point is the day will come where it's ready for you to move on. But every single other day before that, you're not interested, right? It's not even something that you're
Right.
thinking about because you're taking your eye off the ball, right? So it's all about timing, right? And, I think that, the other way to do it is obviously just like go, like at the acquisition lab, we pay for IBIS World for everybody. And it's one of these where you can literally do industry vertical research, even by down to city and state, down to, who are all of the businesses operating in this vertical. And you can obviously just proactively reach out to them and just get, direct mail or, buy a list or whatever it is and be doing outreach in that way. But
What's
yeah,
the resource there? IBIS?
IBIS, yeah, IBIS World. So there, yeah, what is it? We've got a premium subscription. I think if you just go and pay for it, it's like $7,500. But they've got a great tool. IBIS World is they're the best resource that I have found for private market information. Right. In other words, like getting information on the public markets is easy. You just go to Yahoo Finance or whatever your favorite, financial tabloid is and get information on the business. Right. But the private markets are different. Right. Like when a transaction occurs, who really knows what that went for? Right. And then you've got the country club number versus the real number. Right. So I brokered a deal. It was, about $24 million. The two entrepreneurs could have gone, to the country club or wherever they hang out the next day and say, I just sold my company for 24 million, and they would not be lying. However, due to, deferred payouts, due to earnouts, due to, the delayed inventory payments, due to taxes, due to the fact that it was a 50-50 partnership, that day they each probably had about $2.5 million in post-tax dollars in their bank accounts. Right.
Yeah.
So you needed some time. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I want to highlight that because I think that it's actually a really valuable point when you're talking about buying a business also, because what you just said, I would encourage any entrepreneur talking to their friends about an exit when they sell, asking the terms on the exit. It is tremendously common for that. Let's say the exit was the 24 million, for it to be, hey, it's 24 million, but 50% gets paid now. The rest gets earned out over time if certain benchmarks are hit. Well, then that takes it down to $12 million. And as you said, then it's two partners, and then that's $6 million each. And then there's heavy tax on it. And then you're down to like 3 million, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
I think it's important as an exercise when you're talking about exit to go through those things and think about them. But similarly, and I think this is where I want to go with you, because this goes into the terms of acquisition, of purchase. Similarly, when you think about buying a business that's doing a bunch in revenue and it's a $24 million valuation, it doesn't mean that you're out of pocket $24 million to take the company, right?
Yes. And in fact, with existing here's the thing. I know all about how to, buy companies with everybody else's money, right? But this is not something that we advertise at the lab, because it's sort of like, I sense that very few people can actually do it. And so to go out there and advertise hey, we're going to teach all of you how to be independent sponsors, hurry up and sign up. And now we got 5,000 people that we're trying to teach how to be independent sponsors. It's not going to work, right? So the concept is that when I'm selling a business, one of my own, okay? Hold on. Before that, deferred payments come into play all the time on premium exits. Okay. In other words, if I'm buying a company and it's going to be, let's just say, a 3 times earnings, okay, 3 to 3.5 times earnings or less, okay, I'm paying cash at close. I'm using usually 90% leverage on the deal. and I'm getting that owner out of there in 4 weeks. I don't want them in my
Mm.
business. I want them out. I don't want them around. Okay. And I'm paying a 3x on this business. So they're really just a distraction and a problem. Okay. This is true in almost all cases. Okay. And a lot of private equity firms need to go through an educational process when it comes to like the lower middle market in a lot of this, because there's not always these sort of deferred terms. It depends on what's going on. So just to go back to the FBA aggregators as an example, I talked with a whole bunch of them, and they were getting these great, multiples, meaning multiples on sellers' discretionary earnings, right? And so they would often say to me like, "Oh yeah, I just got a 6x, a 7x, an 8x," and it was like, sure, So what's actually getting paid cash at closing, and it's usually like 3 to 3.5, sometimes more, cash at closing. Everything else is deferred. But the concept there, Brad, is that they're getting a premium exit based on the asset class itself. So I just want to
So
start by saying
I want
that.
clarity on the term premium exit and also seller discretionary earnings for the sake of clarity
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, thanks. So there's a difference between EBITDA, adjusted EBITDA, and seller's discretionary earnings. Everyone listening to this podcast has a business and they're familiar with what EBITDA is, right? Earnings before
Mm-hmm.
interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. That is the unit of measure that we use measuring the public markets, right? And just apples to apples, how do I compare this company to that one? EBITDA, okay? Footnote, the reason we use EBITDA is that it actually allows public companies to go acquire other companies as a strategy and not impact their earnings. And that was actually the thing that triggered the move to EBITDA from earnings per share. But let's not digress. Adjusted EBITDA is saying is the private capital markets, where we say, well, look, Brad runs his company. He belongs to, every single, high level mastermind in the universe. So he's spending $100,000 a year just as on memberships. He accidentally, went to Hawaii on vacation and met a customer for 5 minutes. And so the whole entire, vacation, he runs his Tesla through the company, and there's maybe so personal expenses. And then there's these sort of like one-time investments, like, I don't know, I just built a new website and, paid 150,000 for it. And so that doesn't have to get done ever again, for example. Okay. So any of, or legal fees for some issue that's no longer there, your personal CPA, whatever it might be. The concept is we're trying to adjust EBITDA for the business, including your salary, including a salary for a manager, but excluding all of those personal and one-time events that maybe occur in any period of time. Okay, that's adjusted EBITDA. SDE, or seller's discretionary earnings, takes that a step further and says, hey, an owner operator is going to buy this company, and so that salary that Brad is making, that salary that the operator of this business is making, is going to be included in the earnings of this asset. Okay, so that's seller's discretionary earnings. Premium exit. Okay, so I gave a talk, or at Ezra Firestone's event, maybe 6 months ago. So Brad, my mind is a little, it's got some cobwebs in it. But what I did was I went back and looked at all of the data that we have at Quiet Light. And we've got, 16 years of data in terms of, e-com exits. And so I looked at just the last few years and said, hey, let's look at sort of like what an average multiple on SDE is, and then look at sort of a standard deviation around that. And then I wanted to dive into who's getting a standard deviation or above, right? And what is making those deals different, right?
I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that probably at least 60% of the entrepreneurs listening failed math in some capacity. So if you start talking standard deviation and shit, they're gone, buddy. They're just gone. And also, just for the sake of SDE again, when you're talking about multiples of SDE, basically you're saying, EBITDA, what was your, let's call it net profit for a moment. What was the money that you're taking away from the business, but also subtracting sort of the other things that you really don't need to count, but we're all going to write off. We're all going to put on the books, because you should put your car and your cell phone bill and all this in your travel, because you can justify it as a business expense, but it's not really representative of necessary expenses. So SDE is like dropping that to a more realistic number and then taking a multiple on that. And so from a purchase perspective, you as the buyer would want to look at that number because you're like, yeah, I could operate it that way. Is that accurate?
Thank you, Brad. Yes. And the concept there is when you look at SDE, it should be capturing everything that says, okay, this is how much money the business is generating that I, as the owner, can A, take out as salary, B, unfortunately have to pay taxes with, C, pay down principal and interest on the acquisition with, D, reinvest into the company for growth, right? And something else that I can't think of. Let's see, reinvestment. No, that's it. It's reinvestment, earnings, or principal and interest. It's how much you have to work with. Yeah, you nailed it. Thank you.
Great. Yep. Okay. So you were doing a statistical analysis. We'll leave those words out of it for the moment. You were reviewing your portfolio and looking at, you used the term standard deviation. You were looking at the differences between the businesses that sold on a multiple of SDE versus EBITDA. Was that where you were going with this?
No. What I wanted to do was say, like, look, all of my clients, like I crush it. So I know that we do great, but like I've got a team of 14 with Quiet Light. And so what I want to do is look at everybody's, right? And so I looked at everybody's data for the last 3 years and said, okay, what is the average multiple on SDE that is getting sold? And then if we don't want to get into statistics, we'll just say who sold above that, who sold above average. Okay. And
Beautiful.
in fact, I pushed it a little bit higher than just, if you sold a little bit above, I didn't look at it. I went farther. And so I started to figure out, I started to look at, okay, here are the businesses that sold at a premium. Okay. This is what I'm calling a premium exit, right? So in other words, I think it'd be a different interview to go into like what actually justifies all these different premiums, and all the examples were sort of, specific to the deal. But what I would say is that when I'm talking about a premium exit, what I'm talking about is you can look at the average, right? And you can look at a little bit around that average and say, okay, this is basically what the asset class is selling for. Like, Brett, if I say to you, probably not in Austin, let's pick a real estate market that's a little more stable, like St. Louis, and I say whatever, three bedroom, 2 bathroom in Clayton, Missouri. I mean, you're going to kind of have a sense of what that sells for. There's literally like a price per square foot for residential that we can go look at, right? That's like what the average asset is going for. A premium is going to be what's selling above that. And so when people are getting premium exits, okay, and these premium exits are the ones that are making headlines. We all know it, right? These are the ones that are like, oh my God, they sold for 30 billion or whatever your favorite number is. And the thing is when those premium exits are happening, this is not cash at close, people, right? This is not cash at close if you're selling, and it's not cash at close if you're buying, right? And I think that's the point you wanted to make. When you are an existing entrepreneur and you want to grow through acquisition, okay, you can take on a lot of leverage, meaning bank debt, because you don't need the earnings from the business, okay? And you can buy that company with a large volume of debt, and then all of the earnings will go in and build up your equity, right? Now, what if you say to yourself, hey, listen, my company, I'm doing whatever, let's just say 1 to 5 million in revenue. I got this nice little company. It's paying the bills. I'm happy. I'm out there doing it, right? But I really want to go out and buy this other company that's like 50 million, 75 million, 100 million. It is fully in the power of these entrepreneurs to do that. Fully. And the thing is they don't even they need such little capital. It's unbelievable, because the thing is not only at that size are you be able to get, bank debt on the business. You can get cash flow loans, you can get mezzanine debt if you need it. But the little thing that makes the big difference is that now it's big enough for private equity, and they would be happy to take that piece of equity. I put in an offer to buy a company for $180 million. I'd say about 6 months ago. It got declined, Brad, because they're not ready to sell. Okay. But the concept was it was probably going to cost me between 1 and 200,000, just to sort of like pull the team together, run private equity. The little thing that I was going to need was I was going to need the seller to roll 20% equity into the acquisition going forward. Was that way too much information? I wanted to
No, I think that there's well, look, there's in one conversation, there's only so many things we can cover. I think that's really relevant, but it without picking that one apart, I want to highlight two things and hit on the topic that we started in the beginning and haven't made it to yet. But the first is you stopped and highlighted that if somebody's low seven figures, high seven figures, low eight figures, doing an acquisition in the high eight figures or nine figures is entirely possible. And even if you don't have $100 million, you don't need it to make those acquisitions happen. And I think that's a really valuable point. So I think for anybody listening, your resources, Buy Then Build and the Acquisition Lab are good places to check that stuff out. But what I want to highlight here is the next question, which is great. So you find maybe that's not the acquisition, and we could talk about this relative to a nine-figure company versus a high seven or eight. But if you're buying something, where does the existing leadership and management fit into place, and how do you roll that into your company if you're looking to acquire to grow? Right. So let's say that you have an eight-figure company. Let's say you're doing 10 million bucks a year, and you've got a management team, and you're the CEO running it, but you're buying a company that is your size or bigger. Are you buying the management team? Do you want to integrate them in? What are the benefits or drawbacks? How do you approach that in general?
Like all good business questions, the answer is it depends, right?
Yes.
And I think that the first thing is that when you are entertaining buying any company, okay, I cannot recommend enough that the first thing you need to do is just go out to lunch with the founder, the person that's running it, okay? And you're going to be chomping at the bit, thinking like, oh, let me get some financial statements, like let me see the business, let me do all this other stuff because I'm hungry for these assets. What you're getting at is merging the businesses together, right? And the thing is that I learned in B school that it's like 50% of acquisitions actually fail to realize the value that they thought they were going to extract. It's large, okay? And when you look at why, it's never ever because the financial company was the financials were misrepresented or anything like that. 100% of the failure to realize the value that can be extracted is based on the culture of the company and your ability to lead it. In other words, if the culture of the companies are too different, they're not going to merge, okay? And if you just go out to lunch with the potential seller and think to yourself, is this someone I trust? Is this someone I would hang out with, right? Is this someone who, I think is going to be running a good business? The little thing there is that companies are formed in the image of their leaders. Whether you want to call that the founder or the CEO, whoever's kind of running it right then, they're the person that's creating the culture of this business. And if you don't trust the person, or you just don't jive with them in some way, it's not someone you can hang out with, it's already a bad acquisition. That is the fundamental rule in these things, right? You got to be able to find a culture that's going to merge with your culture well. And that's literally like 90, I don't know, I'd be making up a statistic, but it's the whole thing. It's the whole thing. Okay. If you get that culture piece wrong, it's going to be an uphill struggle. In terms of keeping the management team, they like when you buy a company, it depends, right? So the thing is do you want the management team? Okay. And I think that if you are, let's just say, buying a new physical location somewhere else, obviously it's going to be more important than if you're buying a company, 20 minutes away from you. You probably don't need that management team because you already have your own, right? Or maybe you don't have one and you want to acquire them. Now the thing is that it's critical that during the acquisition process, you figure out if those people are going to transfer or not. Okay. One, you want to know if you want them or not. And two, you need to figure out if they're going to transfer. In almost all cases, they do. And in almost all cases, there's a little bit of turnover shortly after the acquisition.
Sure. And that's usually with your acquisitions because people don't like you personally?
That's right. That's it. Yeah, they don't like how. Yeah, I run a tight ship. I mean,
Um,
like
yeah,
I
no, that
think,
makes sense.
yeah, I mean, look, acquisitions can go wrong, and to that point, I bought a company, and God, it must have been maybe let's call it 24 months after I acquired it. 40% of the workforce walked out in one day. They just walked
Mm.
out. They quit, and it's because they didn't like my decision on who was going to lead the company. And, we could say that that's like an acquisition issue. I think it's just an entrepreneurship issue. Like there's challenges out there that we face that are just like unbelievably difficult. And but like I say to people in the acquisition lab, sometimes 40% of your workforce walks out in a single day with no notice, and you got to deal with it. Made for a bad year,
Yeah.
but we made it back.
Well, and of course, that could happen in any company at any point in time, not just through an acquisition.
Yeah,
There are a
exactly.
million reasons that could happen.
Exactly.
Um, I love it, man. Well, look, I know we're coming on time. I think that it's, acquisitions for growth, acquisitions to start a company, acquisitions as an exercise in general are very, very, very valuable for entrepreneurs. And if you're not spending time on it, like I haven't been all of my life, this is a good opportunity to dig in further. I think that there's only strength that comes from it. And want to again reiterate what you just said, which is you can buy things that are much bigger than you actually think you can when you figure out how to do it. So, Walker, I appreciate you spending some time, man. Where can people find out more about you?
Uh, Brad, I think I'm on whatever. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on social media. Buythenbuild.com. There's tons of free resources there. Tons of free resources at buythenbuild.com.
Love it. Walker Dybel, it is fun hanging out. Can't wait to see you in person again sometime soon.
Thanks, Brad. See you soon, man. Thank you. I
Th-
had a lot of fun.
Thank you.